Chapter 57, The Proposal. Time skip home. The peace of Christmas stayed with them, but by the morning of the 26th, a new kind of energy had taken hold of Steve. It wasn't the focused, icy clarity of a soldier preparing to drop into a hot zone, but the sheer, trembling nerves of a man about to make the biggest leap of his life. Steve paced the length of the hardwood floor in the living room, his boots making rhythmic, muted thuds against the rug. He looked down at his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. For a man who had faced down red-skulled madmen, alien invasions, and rogue artificial intelligences without a flicker of hesitation, his hand was remarkably unsteady. He had spent weeks secretly planning this, slipping away under the guise of running errands or checking in on local leads, coordinating with Monroe, Rosalee, and Bud. He opened the group text thread and stared at the draft he had written, deleted, and rewritten 4 times. Today's the day. I'm ready. Simple, direct, a good tactical update. Yet he hesitated, checking the velvet box hidden deep in his jacket pocket for the 10th time that morning. Finally, he tapped send. The response was instantaneous. Monroe, oh my God. Okay, it's happening. Nobody panic. I'm panicking. Rosalee, where are the extra candles? Wait, do we need candles for an outdoor thing? Steve, man, are you sure you're ready? I mean, of course you're ready, you're Captain America, but oh boy, my heart is doing triple time right now. Rosalee, Monroe, breathe. Stop typing. Steve, everything is set on our end. We have the cover story ready. Just let us know when you're heading to the overlook. Ignore my husband, he's currently packing a hole through the spice shop floor. Bud, OHSDEVE. I am just so darn thrilled for you too. I'm literally crying at my kitchen table right now. My wife thinks something's wrong with the plumbing, but it's just my tear ducts. You're gonna do great, buddy. A real fairy tale, that's what this is. Steve couldn't help the small, breathless laugh that escaped him, though it did little to soothe the butterflies charting a course through his stomach. He locked his phone and slid it away just as the bathroom door clicked open. Alisa walked out, drying her hair with a towel, her sharp, grim senses immediately tuning into the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. She paused, her dark eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at him. Steve, you okay? You look like you're trying to calculate flight trajectories in your head. What? No, I'm fine. Perfect, Steve said, his voice a fraction too loud, a beat too fast. He forced a smile that felt tight across his jaw. Just thinking about breakfast, what do you feel like? Alisa slowly lowered the towel, her gaze raking over his rigid posture. Steve, you've been packing for an hour, your shoulders are up to your ears, and you just asked me what I want for breakfast with the intensity of a man issuing a military directive. Did something happen? Is there a rogue Wesen in the area? Did Natasha call? No rogue Wesen. No Natasha, Steve insisted, crossing the room to wrap his arms around her waist, partly to comfort her and partly to anchor himself. He kissed the top of her damp head, inhaling the clean scent of her shampoo. I'm just a little restless. Thought maybe we could take a walk later, see the snow. Alisa leaned into his chest, but her suspicion didn't entirely fade. All right, if you say so, but if Nick calls you with some crazy case and you're trying to hide it from me to let me rest, I'm going to be very annoyed. I promise, it's nothing like that, Steve murmured, his heart hammering against his ribs so loudly he was certain she could hear it. By mid-afternoon, the trap was set. Portland was blanketed in a gorgeous, thick layer of fresh winter snow, the pine trees heavy with white frost under a crisp, pale sky. The phone call came right on schedule. Monroe's voice was a masterpiece of manufactured panic, though Steve knew half of it was genuine anxiety over pulling off the ruse. He claimed there was a highly volatile, deeply confused Siegbarste causing a scene near the Washington Park area, and Nick was tied up at the precinct. Alisa was out the door before Monroe could even finish his sentence, her grim instincts overriding everything else. Steve followed closely behind, driving through the slush-covered streets of Portland, his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to make the leather groan. When they arrived near the Washington Park overlook, Alisa hit the ground running, her eyes scanning the tree line, ready for a fight. But as she moved up the snow-covered path toward the stone viewing platform, the expected sounds of smashing timber and roaring Wesen were entirely absent. There was only the quiet, muffled hush of winter. "Monroe," Alisa called out, her hand resting near the concealed weapon beneath her coat. "Rosalee." She reached the crest of the overlook. The entire city of Portland stretched out below them, a sprawling tapestry of gray, white, and early evening lights beginning to twinkle in the fading dusk. Standing in the center of the snow-dusted stone platform was Steve, alone. He had taken off his heavy winter gloves, and he wasn't looking for a threat. He was just looking at her, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets, though his shoulders were visibly trembling, and it wasn't from the cold. Alisa slowed her pace, her breath forming white plumes in the freezing air. She looked around, the pieces suddenly clicking together in her mind. The weird texts, Bud's erratic behavior over the past week, Monroe's terrible acting on the phone. She looked back at Steve, her heart skipping a massive beat. "Steve," she breathed, her voice suddenly small. "What is this? Where's the Siegbarste?" "There isn't one," Steve admitted, taking a slow step toward her. His voice cracked slightly, a rare vulnerability that made her throat instantly tighten. He took a deep breath, looking down at the snow before meeting her eyes with absolute, unyielding devotion. "I had to get you out here, somewhere quiet, somewhere we could just be." "You lied to a Grimm," she teased, though her voice wobbled, tears already pricking the corners of her eyes. "That's a dangerous game, Rogers." "I took a calculated risk," Steve said, coming to a stop just a foot away from her. He reached out, his large, warm hands taking hers, his skin rough and comforting against her cold fingers. "Alisa, when I woke up in the 21st century, I thought I was a ghost. I thought I was just meant to move from one war to the next, surviving because that's what I was trained to do. I didn't think there was a home left for me. Not really." He squeezed her hands, his gaze burning with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade into white noise. "And then I met you. We've been dragged through hell and back. We've fought monsters, aliens, and the ghosts of my own past. Every time I thought the world was falling apart, I looked at you, and I found my bearings again. I don't want to wait for the next disaster, or the next mission, or the next time the world needs saving before I choose happiness. I don't want to waste another second." Steve's breath hitched, and for a second, the legendary Captain America stumbled over his words, the sheer weight of his emotion overwhelming his carefully rehearsed speech. You're my home, Alisa. You're everything I never thought I'd get to have." Alisa was already crying, the tears freezing on her cheeks as she looked at him. "Steve." Steve let go of one of her hands, reaching into his pocket. He dropped smoothly down onto one knee in the white snow. He opened the small velvet box, revealing a classic, elegant ring that caught the faint twilight. "Alisa, will you marry me?" She didn't even let him finish the breath after the question. "Yes," she sobbed, throwing herself forward, abandoning all grim composure as she crashed into him. Steve caught her easily, laughing with a profound, earth-shattering sense of relief as he lifted her off her feet, burying his face in her neck. They spun slightly in the snow, holding each other as if the ground beneath them might disappear. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking, before pulling her into a deep, desperate kiss that tasted of salt and winter. A few hundred yards away, hidden behind a dense cluster of frosted Douglas firs, 3 figures broke cover. "Oh, look at them, look at them," Bud wailed openly, blowing his nose loudly into a massive handkerchief. "He did it! She said yes, I gotta call my wife." "SHH, Bud, keep it down, they're going to hear you," Monroe whisper yelled, though he was bouncing on the balls of his feet, his face split into a massive grin. "Did you see that? Total textbook execution. He didn't even look nervous at the end. Man, I'm so happy I could shift right now." Rosalee wiped a single, elegant tear from her cheek, smiling warmly as she pulled Monroe's arm closer to her side. "He did wonderful. Come on, let's give them their space. They've earned it." Back on the overlook, oblivious to their friend's lingering presence, Steve pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against Alice's. The city lights twinkled below them like a field of fallen stars, the snow continuing to fall lightly around them. But for the first time in either of their lives, the storm inside had completely ceased. Chapter 58, Quiet at Last. Time skip home. The drive back to their place was a blur of holding hands over the center console, quiet laughter, and Alisa occasionally staring down at the ring on her finger, as if ensuring it wouldn't vanish if she blinked. But by the time they closed the front door behind them, shutting out the biting Portland cold and the well wishes of their found family, a profound silence settled over the house. For months, their lives had been a chaotic symphony of ringing phones, tactical briefs, Wesen emergencies, and the lingering, heavy shadow of the Avengers. True privacy was a luxury they rarely possessed. Steve locked the door and turned around, watching Alisa as she unbuttoned her heavy coat. Without the layers of wool and the freezing air, the reality of what they had just done seemed to settle into the very bones of the house. It was warm inside, the thermostat hummed quietly, and the amber glow of the small lamp in the corner cast long, soft shadows across the room. "No sirens," Alisa murmured, stepping out of her boots. She looked up at him, a soft, incredibly vulnerable smile touching her lips. "No Quinjets, no bloodthirsty bloodbads." "Just us," Steve said softly. He shed his own jacket, tossing it carelessly onto a chair, a rare display of untidiness for him. He walked over to her, his movements slow, deliberate, and entirely stripped of the urgency that usually governed his life. He reached out, his large hands gently cupping her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, tracing the faint, faded line of an old scar from a battle they had barely survived a year ago. Alisa closed her eyes, leaning heavily into his palms, letting out a long, shuddering breath that she felt she'd been holding since the day they met. Alisa closed her eyes, leaning heavily into his palms, letting out a long, shuddering breath that she felt she'd been holding since the day they met. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to just look at you without a countdown clock running in my head," Steve whispered. His blue eyes were dark with an intensity that wasn't born of anger or adrenaline, but a deep, aching devotion. "Then look," Alisa whispered back, opening her eyes. Steve leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the hurried, desperate kiss of a soldier saying goodbye before a drop, or the celebratory embrace from the overlook. It was slow, reverent, and heavy with a quiet longing that ran decades deep. His lips parted hers with a gentle insistence, his hands moving from her face down to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in her dark hair. Alisa wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling herself flush against his massive frame. The sheer size of him had always made her feel safe, but tonight, the heat radiating from his body felt like a sanctuary. She felt the solid, rhythmic thud of his super soldier heart against her ribs, steady and unbroken. Steve groaned softly, the sound rumbling in his chest as he shifted his weight, backing her up gently until her knees hit the edge of the mattress in their bedroom. They tumbled down together in a tangle of limbs and soft laughter, the heavy duvet rising up around them like a barrier against the rest of the world. Steve hovered over her, supporting his weight on his forearms so he wouldn't crush her, though Alisa immediately hooked her legs around his waist, pulling him closer. He looked down at her, his blonde hair slightly mussed, a rare, boyish smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're beautiful, Alisa," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave, thick with emotion. "Every single day, even when you're threatening to throw a tracking device at Stark's head." "He deserved it," she teased softly, her fingers tracing the sharp, defined line of his jawline, moving down to the collar of his Henley shirt. "And you're not so bad yourself, Rogers, for an old man." "Old man, huh?" Steve caught her hand, kissing her knuckles right above the new ring, before shifting his weight to lie beside her, pulling her tightly against his side. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her skin, his large hand sliding under her shirt to rest against the bare skin of her waist. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, his touch incredibly gentle as he traced slow, soothing circles against her skin. Alisa let out a soft sigh, her body completely relaxing against his. The fierce, hyper-vigilant Grimm guard she wore like armor every day melted away, leaving only the woman who loved him. She turned her head, kissing his temple, his cheek, finding his lips again in the dim, cozy warmth of the room. The conversation drifted away, replaced by the soft rustle of blankets, the sound of their synchronized breathing, and the quiet, sacred language of touch. Every kiss was an anchor, every stroke of his hand across her back was a promise. There was no rush. They had all night, a rare pocket of stolen time where the world outside stopped turning, leaving them alone in the quiet dark. Hours later, the snow outside continued to fall, dusting the windowsill in silence. Inside, the room was thick with the peaceful aftermath of shared intimacy. Alisa was curled against Steve's chest, one of her legs draped over his, her head resting just below his shoulder. Steve had his arm wrapped securely around her, his fingers absent-mindedly playing with a strand of her hair. The heavy duvet was pulled up to their shoulders, keeping out the winter chill. "What are you thinking about?" Alisa asked quietly, her voice sleepy but content. Steve smiled into the darkness, his chest rising and falling beneath her head. "Just thinking about the future. For a long time, I couldn't see past the next day. Now I'm thinking about summers. I'm thinking about what kind of house we want. Maybe something with a yard. A place where Monroe and Rosalee can bring the kids over, where Sam can complain about my cooking." Alisa chuckled, pressing a soft kiss to his chest. "Sam loves your cooking, he just likes pushing your buttons." "He does," Steve agreed softly. He tightened his grip on her, pulling her just a fraction closer, as if still making sure she was real. "We're going to build a life, Alisa, a real one, I promise you." "I know we are," she whispered, closing her eyes as sleep finally began to pull her under, safely wrapped in the arms of the only man who had ever made her feel completely invincible. Chapter 59, The Spice Shop Summit. Time skip Spice Shop. The transition from a solitary super soldier and a solitary Grimm into a couple planning a life together required a very specific kind of adjustment. Mostly, it required realizing that their lives were no longer entirely their own. 3 weeks after the proposal, the kitchen table of their Portland home had been completely overtaken. "No, see, this is what I'm talking about," Monroe said, packing a tight circle around the kitchen island while brandishing a wooden spoon like a conductor's baton. "If we have the reception at the loft, we have to consider the sensory overload. You've got Avengers. You've got Wesen. If Stark brings some kind of high-frequency holographic display, it's going to make every Futchsbau and Blutbed within a 3-mile radius scratch their own ears off. I'm just looking out for the guests, Steve." Steve, sitting at the table with a massive binder Rosalee had gifted them, rubbed his temples. "Monroe, Tony already promised he'd leave the heavy tech at the compound. He offered to fly in a 5-star catering crew from Paris instead." "Oh, great. French food," Monroe muttered, rolling his eyes. "Because nothing says cozy Portland wedding like microscopic portions of duck liver covered in foam." Alisa walked into the kitchen, carrying a laundry basket on her hip, watching the scene with an amused smirk. "Are you two still arguing about the menu? Because I thought we agreed on a taco truck." "A taco truck," Bud shouted from the living room couch, where he was currently holding a stack of fabric swatches for the table runners. He jumped up, nearly tripping over a footstool. "Oh, Alisa, that is a beautiful idea, a taco truck. It's casual, it's communal, it keeps people moving. And my cousin, he runs a repair shop right next to this fantastic carnitas place. I could talk to him, get you a discount." "Bud, breathe," Rosalee said gently, walking in from the hallway with a stack of local event permits. She offered Alisa a sympathetic look. "Don't let them overwhelm you. It's your day. If you want a taco truck, we will find the absolute best taco truck in the Pacific Northwest." Steve caught Alisa's eye, a desperate, silent plea for rescue written across his face. She chuckled, setting the laundry basket down, and walked over to lean against his shoulder. Steve immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her into his side and resting his forehead against her temple. "We appreciate all the help," Steve said, his voice deep and warm, calming the frantic energy in the room. Really, but Alisa and I want something small, safe, just the people in this room and a few friends from New York. Exactly, Alisa agreed, reaching back to run her fingers through Steve's blonde hair. No press, no massive galas, just a night where we don't have to look over our shoulders. The room softened at that. Monroe stopped packing, his expression turning incredibly fond as he looked at the two of them. Yeah, okay, a taco truck it is, but I'm still picking the music. No offense, Steve, but your big band stuff is great for a workout, but people need to dance. I can dance to big band, Steve muttered, though there was a boyish grin on his face. Sure you can, Cap, Alisa teased, leaning up to kiss his cheek. But I've seen your footwork. You move like a boxer. We're going to need to practice.